Chair recognizes Honourable Member for Hawksbill.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Speaker, I support the legislation because it is going to give the time for mature consideration of what the policy ought to be for the continuation of Freeport. And what is always fascinating to me is the accusations that are made by those who oppose the Progressive Liberal Party and its policy toward the city of Freeport is that somehow they're trying to pin on the Progressive Liberal Party that it does not care about Freeport and its survivability and about the people of Grand Bahama. Nothing could be further from the truth. Anybody who is involved in the public policy of the Bahamas must know that the future of the Bahamas depends on Freeport's success. And everything that the Progressive Liberal Party has done to manage the policies toward Freeport, all of those things have been done to ensure that Freeport and Grand Bahama are successes for the Bahamas and that its future is assured. If you go as far back, even beyond the speech of November 1969, when the late founding Prime Minister of the country delivered what his enemies called the bend or break speech, which took place at the opening of the Borco facility in 1969, I'm told in July of that year. If you look at the history of the social discrimination which existed in Freeport up to that time, where this agreement was signed and the impression was given that Bahamians need not apply in the city which was being hosted in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And the simple point that Prime Minister Pindling was trying to make then is, you cannot plan Bahamians out of Freeport. And if you seek to plan Bahamians out of Freeport, it would either have to bend to the wishes of the Bahamians or the city would be broken. And he had to make that dare because people were seeking to think that Bahamians had no role to play in the city or a subservient role to play in the city. The speech was necessary to bring some kind of social order back to Grand Bahama. It's an argument that we in this generation are going to have to face today as we see an investor who's seeking to try and face us down in public today. And I just want to say, sir, in that case, and this is as far as I suppose you'll allow me to stray.
Absolutely.
If he fools with that, iron will meet iron today. Iron will meet iron. Yeah, I know. I'm being biblical. So, Mr. Speaker, that is the context in which the policy developed in 1969. And ever since then, we've been trying to progress a situation where Freeport is able to integrate and embrace Bahamians fully into the city. Now, when you have an agreement, and this Hawksbill Creek Act, which seeks to enshrine in law the agreement between the Grand Bahama Port Authority Limited and the Bahamas government. When you have an agreement, there are two sides. There's a bargain that's struck. You agree to do one thing, and we agree to do another. The primary mover of the development of Freeport, in exchange for all of the concessions that were given by the Bahamas government, was supposed to be the Grand Bahama Port Authority. And in exchange for the concessions, they were supposed to bring businesses in here. Those businesses were supposed to develop, and they're supposed to hire Bahamians, give Bahamians investment opportunities, and the place was supposed to grow. In fact, it said the city was designed for 250,000 people. So it's got a lot of potential. So when members say that the future of the country is there, that is actually what they mean. That if you want to grow the Bahamas, you have a planned city which already has all of the infrastructure that will allow the city of Freeport to grow. But there is a construct, there is a bargain which is struck. And the Grand Bahama Port Authority's main and principal role is supposed to be able to promote that city and bring business to that city. The question is now, is the Grand Bahama Port Authority, in its present situation, performing their part of the bargain? In I think the last, someone said the last major investment that came to Grand Bahama was some 23 years ago. There's not been any big, huge investment since that time that's really enlivened the city. So when people start blaming, as it appears, the member for Central Grand Bahama starts trying to pin on the Progressive Liberal Party that this has not happened or the next has not happened in Grand Bahama, what has happened to the primary, the primary agent of this? Where is their role in this? What have they done to promote the city and to bring the business that would drive the jobs and drive the investment?
That's why they were there.
That's the job. That is their primary responsibility. She's my good friend. And I think we need to have that kind of frank conversation, and that is what this committee did. It had a frank conversation with all of the actors in Grand Bahama about what needs to happen in the future. There's a man named Terrence Gate, who is an attorney in Freeport. And prior to this, the point at which we're at, he wrote an extensive essay about what he thought ought to happen in Grand Bahama with regard to the provisions when they expire on the 4th of August. His view was pure and simple: do not renew them. His view was that allow the real property taxes, which is the real thing that would expire, allow them to expire, because essentially what had happened, he argues, is that the Grand Bahama Development Company had become a land bank, and they were simply sitting on land, not developing the land, and getting clean away without being able to pay taxes. And he believed that some benefit ought to come to the Bahamian people by allowing these provisions to expire, and therefore the real property taxes in the first instance would come to the Bahamas government. So that is one of the views which is most prevalent in Grand Bahama. And what seems to have happened in Grand Bahama also is that the relationship between the Grand Bahama Port Authority and its licensees is not where it actually should be. There is a feeling amongst the licensees, which is loudly expressed wherever you go, that the Grand Bahama Port Authority as a regulator is collecting fees and charges, not producing the services that it's supposed to for the city, mainly promoting the business and bringing in investment, but at the same time not taking care of the interests of the licensees. And so much work has to be done with regard to the relationship between the Grand Bahama Port Authority and its licensees with regard to that. Much is also said, Mr. Speaker, about the immigration policy that as it applies to Grand Bahama. Now, I think if you remember the original agreement, it also allowed the Grand Bahama Port Authority prior to 1969 to also have the major say, if not all the say, on immigration. And they had their own say about policemen as well in the city of Freeport. In 1969, there were some talks between the British government, the Grand Bahama Port Authority, resulted in various changes, one of which was to return immigration control to the Bahamas government, fully to the Bahamas government. And since that time, there's been a back and forth about the policies of the government, whether they were too severe, whether they crimped the development of the city or not. In fact, when the speech was delivered in 1969, what was being asserted was the fact that the government was going to be now exercising greater control over the city in connection with that, one of those very important policies, that of immigration. It's important, therefore, to put things in a general context about what happens with immigration policy. The principle of the policy on immigration is this: the primary economic benefits of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas are for Bahamians. Bahamians come first in the Bahamas. Bahamians only take second place to non-nationals in their own country when those skills are not found within the Bahamas. And there's a mechanism for doing that. And there's a lot of confusion about this. I saw recently where one of our more doddering critics was in the newspaper suggesting that one of the reasons why the Bahamas can't succeed as an arbitration center is because of the immigration policy. That somehow we are preventing lawyers from coming in outside the Bahamas because of the immigration policy. Let me set that straight. Immigration, Mr. Speaker, makes its decisions on who comes into this country as lawyers based on the position taken by the Bahamas Bar Council. So anyone who has an argument about which lawyers come in and come out of this country should not have an argument with the Department of Immigration, but actually should be looking to the Bahamas Bar Council as a professional association that decides who comes in and who doesn't come in as an attorney. So that's the issue there. Secondly, though, the principle applies generally in the city of Freeport. When I became minister, one of the more disturbing aspects of approvals in the city of Grand Bahama was a whole host of the industrial companies in that island applying for pipe fitters, welders, painters, I think blasters. What was the other one? Riggers. Now, I would sit there. The Minister for Grand Bahama sits in on the meetings. The parliamentary secretary in the ministry, we all sit in the meetings, and we go over this list. And here we are, Mr. Speaker, in the year 2015, sitting down, approving work permit after work permit for welders, pipe fitters, riggers, painters, blasters. On the face of it, you should think that those are trades and professions which should be, the skills should be readily available in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. To my surprise and chagrin, I'm advised that that's not the case. And so therefore, the permits have to be issued. In fact, the Department of Labor has a part to play in the process in the sense that work permit applications where the skills are being applied for have to be certified by the Department of Labor as being absent in the Bahamas. And it is only in those cases where the Department of Labor issues a certificate that the skill is not available in the Bahamas that the Immigration Board considers the application and then agrees to the permit. The question then for me, though, is how do Bahamians in Grand Bahama, 18, 19, 20, stand outside the fence and look at people coming in from the outside who are their ages, don't seem to have any extraordinary skill, either driving into a bus or walking through the gate every morning, When they're finished in the evening, they can go to the pub in Grand Bahama and enjoy a good fellowship with their friends and family. Go to MoneyGram and Western Union and send the money back home. And these young Bahamians have to go back to 8 Mile Rock with their bellies empty and pockets empty. That's the question I have in my mind. And I say, how do we correct that problem? And I tried to put it as delicately as I could to these companies. I didn't say bend or break, but I certainly had that in the back of my mind by explaining this to them. If the companies who come into the Bahamas and get the benefits of the Bahamian economy do not join in the process of this bargain with the next generation of Bahamians to incorporate them into the economy of the Bahamas, we are looking at a social explosion and trouble down the road. So it is good business for them. If the skills are not available in the Bahamas, it's good business for them to make sure that the skills are available and the training is available. And I said to them, there are many Bahamians, Bahamian companies in Grand Bahama. Fred Delancey is his name? Fred Delancey has a training operation in Grand Bahama to train welders. Have Edney Anderson. He has another operation, which is training welders. And we've gone to the graduations. And these young faces who are coming out of these schools. And, you know, we come there as public officials and we make our speeches and we congratulate them. But I can tell you that when the question and answer period happens at the end of the day, the first thing they ask you is, where are we going to get a job? And what often happens is, after they've graduated and they've got the certificate, they still can't get a job in the industrial sector. So I can tell you Dr. Darvel has been working with these companies, you know, pounding on the doorstep, saying you have to do something about this, because push then comes to shove if we don't do something about it. I asked one of the companies, I said, one of the personnel officers, I said, look, these people, Mr. Delancey, Mr. Anderson, they have their training institutes, they have their welding certificates. Why can't these people be hired? So I was told, oh, well, yes, they're welders, but what you need is flux welding. They're not trained in flux welding. I never heard of flux welding before. I don't know what flux welding is. But then I went back to the same training agents and I said, well, they say you don't have flux welding. And he said, no, that's not so, because we can train you in, we can train people in flux welding as well. So to the great credit of the Grand Bahama shipyard, they agreed with the work of Dr. Darvel, with the Member of Parliament for Pine Ridge, to implement a training program. And one of the things that happens for ministers is you always have to go on a tour. And I say this as a side. There was a fellow who has a hotel. He's in the news these days. He asked me to come down and look at his hotel. I told him I wasn't coming because I've seen the hotel before. So I'm not a tourist in that sense. And so I was invited to go down to see the Grand Bahama shipyard. Impressive facility. But I can tell you that nothing was more impressive than when they had 30, 35 young people. And they did it like this. We walked into this room, and they just filed into the room, one after the next. And I said, they've got it. They finally understand. Sorry? That's right. And yesterday they were telling us they have 400 permanent workers, because that's the future of the country. There can be no social peace unless we fix that problem. And every company that comes in here, it astounds me, Mr. Speaker, as the Minister for Immigration, how, you know, I don't know how to explain this, right? Where it appears that you would think that if you came to the Bahamas, your starting position with regard to your workforce is going to be Bahamians will be the workforce. But when you sit in the cabinet, you get these proposals, and they seem to go out of the way to say, we are going to hire 50 Bahamians, as if this is something extraordinary that they're doing. What do you mean you're going to hire? Of course you're going to hire 50 Bahamians. The question is, how many non-Bahamians are you going to hire? That's the real question, to put it the other way around. You understand the point? As if you know, Bahamians need not apply, or that somehow we are, you know, sort of second-class citizens, right? And then, of course, you have these curmudgeons who are sitting around, you know, their tables in Lyford Key, sipping tea with nothing else to do in the day but write letters to the newspaper, you know, attacking the policy on immigration. Attacking the policies on immigration. And blaming immigration for everything that's going on in the country. The fact is, Mr. Speaker, these are policies which we must defend. Grand Bahama, and in particular Freeport, and its economic growth, will be responsible and is responsible for ensuring the peace and stability of the island of New Providence. When the last administration was in office, one of the things I often said to my seat, as they made accusations against the Progressive Liberal Party, and what our alleged lack of support for Grand Bahama is, why would any public policy designer or manager of public policy, knowing how important Grand Bahama is to the economy of the Bahamas, not support the economic development of Grand Bahama? As soon as unemployment becomes a problem in Grand Bahama, it becomes a huge issue for New Providence. Because people will tell you about the social fabric. One of the things I had to learn when I first went to Grand Bahama is that unlike New Providence, you can't just drop around to anybody's house in Grand Bahama and say you come to visit. You better call first, because people don't open the door. You know, people left this island to start a new life in Grand Bahama, and they created a new culture there. First, you've got to drive everywhere you want to go in the city of Freeport. Wonderful roads, great infrastructure. So it's a different kind of city. Now, one of the consequences of the social life in Freeport is that you don't have mama and papa to run to if something goes wrong in Grand Bahama, in Freeport. Everybody's back in the old town. And so there's no family social network unless you're actually from Grand Bahama to fall back on. So as soon as there's unemployment in Grand Bahama, it puts pressure on New Providence, because the people in Freeport have to move back to the city, back to Nassau. And that has happened since this recession in 2008. The traffic has been coming back this way. And that must be reversed. And so all of our efforts are geared toward trying to reverse that. And we want to make the right decision now. We want to make some little bargain where you build one little building here in exchange for these tax concessions. I'm advised that tax concessions in the first instance on real property tax would be about $8 million the government will collect if the real property tax were payable straight away. Not sure, but you know, even $8 million, that's no chump change. And people keep saying that that Grand Bahama and the city of Freeport makes these great contributions to the public treasury. The National Development Plan is doing the studies now, but the preliminary evidence is that they are a net consumer of government services. A net consumer of government services. So yes, there's a great contribution to the treasury, but the government puts plenty of resources into Grand Bahama to make sure that it is a Bahamian place, and that we protect the economic benefits for Bahamians by supplying immigration and customs and all of the other services which the government supplies. There's no question about the dedication which the Progressive Liberal Party has to the forward movement of that society. And, Mr. Speaker, the interesting thing about this is that across the political divide in the Bahamas, there are some essentials which everybody agrees on about how to move forward. One of them is, the predicate is that Grand Bahama has been a success for the Bahamas, and we want to be sure that that success continues. The question is the equity in the Grand Bahama Port Authority. Should that continue the way it is? Is it possible under this present construct for the city to be moved forward with the present equity distribution? Do new owners have to be found? And if those are new owners, who will the new owners be? Is the model of 1955 or 1955, is that model one that should continue? Or does the whole model have to be revisited as we move forward? And then should the government, if the equity is going to, if it's going to continue to be a privately owned company, is the government going to have equity in the city? Or, to take it a step further, should all the regulatory authority, which is now in the Grand Bahama Port Authority Limited, should that be all turned over to the government, and the equity owners of the port be left to what they're supposed to be doing, which is to promote the city and to bring in investment, and let the government deal with the governmental functions? So all of those things have to be revisited. And there has to be a patient discussion about it. There's no need to rush. We know, of course, from the model of the Act in 1993 that it was passed ex post facto, since all the things had already expired and was backdated. So I heard this thing about "late again," which is a campaign slogan. I was saying sort of facetiously to one of my friends on the other side, I don't understand how something being done 7 days before the expiry of the deadline is late, but you'll explain that to me. Yeah, okay.
But that's waiting 2 years to bring it in.
That's not late. That isn't late. No.
That's the point. 2 days,
Yeah.
2 days don't know the fact.
But I understand in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, there's one rule for the Progressive Liberal Party and another for the Free National
2
Movement.
years don't mean that.
2 years and retroactively.
Yeah, so,
Retroactively.
right. So,
2 years, expired for 2 years.
so I'm sure they have their answers for all of the many questions. So, Mr. Speaker,
Never let the facts
interfere in a good story. So, Mr. Speaker,
Honourable members,
the sum total of it all is, let there be no doubt of the absolute dedication and support we have to the city of Freeport specifically and Grand Bahama generally. Whether we win, we've won seats in the past, and we've lost seats in the past. But we have never, ever taken our eyes off Freeport and Grand Bahama. We have never, ever lost our contact with our supporters from the west out to the east. We always have our share. We always have our share. And nothing will change that. And win, lose, or draw, we know that we have to protect the interests not only of our specific supporters, but of the city generally. And that's the mission that we're on. We're going to continue day after day in the daily slog of making sure. And one day, people will appreciate looking back after the fact and say how we made the right decision by being patient, by being deliberative, by involving all of the stakeholders, both opposition and government. And for us, what is very important is yesterday, Mr. Speaker, when we were up there, and the cabinet met, and we were hosted by the Minister for Grand Bahama. And when the Prime Minister walked onto those grounds, and there was this loud cheer as he showed up on the grounds,
That's right.
is this fact, that we know that government is with the consent of the government, consent of the government. That taking the government to Grand Bahama, we knew that we had the consent of the government, not by force, not by might. They support us by their consent. I support the bill.
Yeah.